Hey guys, my name is Raigna and welcome to my channel. So today what I have for you is horror stories and makeup. I normally do this series in Spanish, but I just thought I'd give it a try in English, so bear with me. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know how this is gonna go. I've never done it in English, but I'm so excited, so I hope you guys like it. This series was absolutely inspired by Robert Welsh. He does ghost stories and makeup and Mr. Nightmare's channel. His channel is all about real horror stories. So I just thought I'd do a mix of both makeup and real horror stories in general. Let's get started right away. I will be writing down all the products I'm going to be using in the description box just so it doesn't mess with the flow. All right, let's start. This is a really good one. Just to let you guys know, these are all real horror stories found on the internet. I have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with the stories of creatures that come alive at night and the safety offers by a house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off. Of course, that night the game went into extra innings, so I didn't get to drop my friend off back until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green right when you decide to just run it. So of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week, I had heard the phrase, character is what you do when no one is looking. So for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, when I happened to look out on my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and I knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that all my windows were up and all my doors were locked. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me so I could just get out of there. But I knew there was a slim chance of that. Walked right up to my window and put down her bag and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her and she mentioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down. She didn't seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give you a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and kind of a indeterminate age. She was either on her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20 plus years on the street, or she was 60-something years old and had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by her boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, like she was disconnected for the moment. That made my skin crawl. And after a brief, maybe about a second, debate on whether I should do it, I told her I had to get home and that I couldn't give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. My boyfriend beat me up. At this time, the light had changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then looked down on me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. You made the right decision. Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were more people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. That encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark. That was actually a really good story. I would have pissed my pants if that happened to me. Just saying. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs, and it seemed like the perfect balance of having space and also having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no street lights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moon. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff. I can't talk. I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around that house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I just ignored it and went inside. I just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and just call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use the shower after work before his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even when I wasn't home. But he would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had light sensors that would dim the screen and the light, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through my squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9 something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had time to open the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms upstairs. 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, and a spare, and a bathroom at the end of the hallway. The bedroom doors were both locked, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me just enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and then stop. Since they didn't see me in that room, they ran out of the hallway and into the other room, which had boxes stacked in a corner. I guess they decided that if someone was hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking into the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The men in my house ran back downstairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I left my cell phone when I ran into the closet, and I wasn't certain that I could climb down without him hearing me. After some time, the noises stopped, and I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. First thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. I assumed in an attempt to find me. That was the noise that I heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone though, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were thrown across the floor. All the boxed and canned foods in the kitchen had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. Police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think he had been watching my house for a while now. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me to stay with family or friends that night until I got that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved the shelf over to block the door that was broken and spent the next couple of hours trying to fix things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence where the police said they found the cigarettes and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed the back and sides of the house. Ran a cable phone up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened in that house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed and going into my closet and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower trying to get into the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. There are some really crazy people out there, man. Nothing else I can say. All right, next story. During my early 20s, I worked as a meter reader in Iowa City. A meter reader is a person who records how much electricity, gas, or water you've used each month. If your meters are on the inside and you want an accurate bill, a meter reader must enter your home, whether you're there to let them in or not. Just to clarify, we only entered homes if consent was given when a customer first signed up for service. Customers also provided us with keys if necessary. Entering a home when the owner wasn't there is something that I never got used to. No matter how loudly I knocked, I never shook the uneasy feeling that I wasn't welcome. The inside of a home is the ultimate private space. The further you enter inside, the closer you come to truly seeing what kind of person lives there. And if you want the raw, unfiltered truth, head to the basement. I really hate basements. I've seen walls that look like giant static field TV screens until I realized it was roaches scurrying across the white background. Oh, disgusting. I've seen rats, snakes, feces, weapons, neglected children, abused pets, homeless squatters, massive hoards, bizarre sexual items, a makeshift meth lab, and even a coffin. Ew. There are usually rational explanations for all these things. Really? Well, maybe not the coffin, but there was one basement where I found was beyond the grasp of logic, and that's what made it so terrifying. It was an old apartment house. From the outside, it looked like every other house on the block. I entered the back door and found myself at the top of a staircase. I ran my hand along the wall until it grazed a light switch. I flipped the switch, but no lights turned on. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. A typical route involved 5 or 6 hours of walking, so I carried as little as possible. Oftentimes, I used the light from my handheld screen, but it only illuminated whatever was about a foot in front of me. So armed with the world's worst lantern, I made my way down into the darkness. Once at the bottom, I blindly shuffled across the room, one baby step at a time. With my arms outstretched and head down, I eventually reached the far side of the basement. I shined the dim light from my handheld along the wall and discovered 2 doors. Each door led into its all small room. I chose the door on the right, and I found the meter in the far corner. As I entered the reeds, I began hearing noises coming from the other room. Something was moving, and there was whimpering that grew louder the longer I listened. I eventually realized that it was a dog. It sounded weak and distressed. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. At this point, the dog was scratching at the other side of the door. I felt helpless. I reported it when I got back to the office, but I couldn't shake the thought of that dog. It stuck with me over the next month until it was time to return. So there I was, 1 month later, back within that basement. At least this time, I knew where the meters were located. I shuffled back to the little room on the right, while keeping my ears open for any sounds coming from the other room. This time, I heard nothing. I read the meters and started making my way back, but I couldn't shake the memory of that dog. Was it still trapped inside that room? My curiosity got the best of me. I stood outside the door for a few moments, listening. Still nothing. That's when I made a huge mistake. I tried to open the door. I had no more than jiggled the doorknob when I first heard it. Screams. Blood-curdling screams. Unlike anything I'd ever heard. Sounds that I didn't think a human was even capable of producing. Short, piercing, high-pitched shrieks followed abruptly by a low, drawn-out, guttural moan that ultimately morphed into something that I can only describe as crying, but much louder. It was all over the place, like some sort of psychotic, free-form jazz. I stumbled backwards, nearly losing my balance. I shouted something like, "Hello? Who's in there?" There was no response, just screams. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still no response, just screams. There was no doubt that I yelled loud enough for him to hear me. Didn't want my help, he wanted me to leave. I fumbled my way through the darkened room toward the exit. When I reached the top of the stairs, I just stood there, listening. I was trying to wrap my mind around what I was trying to hear. I waited for the screaming to stop, but they never did. When I finally left, it was still as loud and demented as when it began. I felt relieved, but that quickly vanished when I realized I had to do it all over again next month. I reported what I heard, but nothing came of it. As my return drew near, a sense of dread grew inside of me. What kind of lunatic sits alone in total darkness and silence? My mind created endless explanations for what kind of hell laid beyond that door. By the time I returned, I had built him up so much in my mind that anything less than the devil himself would have been a letdown. There was no sound of him, but there was no sign of him the next month, or even for several months. I'd nearly given up on solving the mystery when a stroke of luck pulled me back in. One night, I went to a concert with my friend Laura. After the show, I gave her a ride home. She moved somewhat recently, so she had to give me directions. I didn't pay much attention to where she was leading me until she pointed to a house a little bit up the street. I couldn't believe it. She had moved into the house with the mysterious room in the basement. I said to her, "Look, this sounds weird, but have you noticed anything odd about the basement?" But before I could finish my sentence, she blurted out that there was a crazy guy that lived down there. Finally, I had confirmation. She went on to tell me that even though her apartment was in the attic, she often heard him yelling at night. But that wasn't all. She had actually met him. One day, while walking to her car, she saw him standing in the lawn. He stood perfectly still with no expression on his face. He was directly in her path, so she cautiously made her way around him. She noticed he was staring at her, so she offered a friendly hi as she passed. He had no reaction except for one unsettling exception. He stuck out his tongue and then quickly sucked it back in and resumed acting like a statue. Creeped out, she got into her car and drove away. 2 or 3 months later, I finally met him myself. I entered the back door like I had done so many months before. This time, something was different. There was a light on in the basement. I peered down the staircase. At the bottom, a ragged-looking dog was staring back at me. It was the same dog I had heard during my first visit. Then I noticed something else. Behind the dog, I could see a pair of bare feet. The ceiling blocked my view of whoever was standing there, but it didn't matter. I knew it was him. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I know this probably doesn't make any sense, but at this point my desire to finally get some answers outweighed my fear. I shakily called out, "Hey, I'm the meter reader," and started making my descent. As I made my way down, more of him was revealed. He looked to be middle-aged. His head was shaved and his eyes were wild. He was wearing pants but no shirt. What I remember most was how lean his body was. It had the look of a body that was never at rest. I explained who I was and what I was doing there. To my surprise, not only did he talk to me, but he actually sounded somewhat normal. The volume and pitch of his voice was odd, but he said the things that typical people said to the readers. I even started to doubt whether or not he was the same man I heard screaming, but soon enough, his behavior removed all doubt. As I read the meter, he rapidly paced back and forth. He was constantly bringing his hands together and constantly cocking his head side to side. The longer he talked, the more agitated he became. He began grimacing, and little verbal tics started popping out in his speech. Every so often, he'd blurt out a loud noise in the middle of a sentence. I started to make my way to the exit, and he followed. His verbal outbursts grew louder and more frequent. I was petrified. When I reached the stairs, I drew our conversation to an end and said goodbye. As I turned ahead of the staircase, he could no longer hold it in. Screams. The very same unforgettable screams that I heard coming from the locked room. I ran up the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me, flung the door open and rushed back into the daylight. A month or two later, I had a couple of friends, including Laura, over to my place. I was excited to tell her all about my encounter. But as I was relaying what happened, I could tell that something else was on her mind. When I finished telling her my story, she told me something that she'd seen a couple of weeks earlier. One day, she noticed lights flashing outside of her window. She looked outside just in time to see police officers placing the man from the basement in the back seat of a squad car. She later found out from another tenant that he had attacked someone with a knife. That was the last we ever saw of him. I don't know what became of the man in the basement. I'd like to think that he got the help that he needed, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think about the alternative. Alright, so let's get to our final story. About a year ago, in my final semester in college, I worked in a department store in a mall. I didn't have a car yet, so I asked for day shifts because it was a 2-hour bus ride back home. So basically, if I had a closing shift, I'd get it done at 11, but not get home until 1 a.m. But sometimes I'd be giving closing shifts, much to my annoyance, since I had a 6:45 a.m. class, and my mother worried because who wants their kid on a public transport that late? I mean, sometimes she could come and get me, but it became too much of a hassle to get my younger sisters out that late, so I never asked her to. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of closing shifts, knowing my situation. I was pissed, but whatever. One night, I had just finished my shift, got on the bus, and sat in the back. I was minding my own business when my iPod died. I was annoyed, but I just kept my earbuds in and occupied myself by playing out crosswords on my phone. About 2 seats behind me, I hear these guys speaking Spanish. Now, my stepmother is Puerto Rican, so I understand a fair bit of Spanish. I don't speak it, though. So I hear them talking, but I don't pay attention because it's rude to eavesdrop. Eavesdrop and all. That was until they say, and I quote, "That black girl up there." Then my ears perk up. I keep my earbuds in so they think I can't hear them, and I continue listening. What they're saying is horrific. To paraphrase, they knew my stop, which was the second to last one before the bus gets back to the terminal. And while my stop is in the front of my neighborhood, it's got no street lights, and at this time of night, it's empty. And to put it simply, they were planning on, quote, snatching that piece of ass up. I was about 20 minutes away from home, so I knew I had to act quickly. Since I knew they could see me, as they were 2 seats behind me, but like across, if that makes sense. I pretended to play on my phone, acting oblivious while I was actually texting my mom. I text her saying, "Mom, can you please meet me at the bus stop?" 5 minutes go by, but no answer. We're getting closer to my stop, so I decided to call her cell phone. No answer. So I call the house phone, and she finally answers. It's about 12:30 a.m., so she was sleeping. I try to talk as calm and cheerily as I can. This was our conversation. "Hey, Mom, did you get my text?" No, what's up?" I sent you a picture of these jeans I'm gonna order online when I get home. I really need your opinion, so I really need you to look since the sale ends at 1 a.m. She gets the hint that I need her to look at her cell phone. So I say goodbye and hope for the best. We get to my stop, and thank God I see my mom's car. I picked my shit up and hightail it off the bus. I don't even look behind me to see if they're following me. I jump in the car and tell my mom to just go. I look in the rear view and I see the guys just staring at the car. The next morning, I called my job and told them I quit. No more public transport for me. Thanks to my stepmom for teaching me Spanish, and thanks to my mom to getting the hint. I hope I don't ever see those creepy Spanish speaking guys ever again. Okay guys, so this is the final look of the makeup. I had another story, but then I just realized that my makeup was almost done and the stories were very long, so I guess I'll just leave them for the next video. I hope you really liked this video, guys. I hope it entertained you as much as it entertained me doing it, and I hope you like the stories. They were actually so creepy. My husband scared the crap out of me coming inside while I was recording. I'll put that in the end of the video so you can enjoy me almost grabbing myself. Alright, so if you have any true horror stories you'd like me to tell in this video, you can send it to this email that I will put right here, and I will tell your story in one of my future videos. Subscribe and hit the like button. Subscribe. Oh shit. Hit the like button. English, come back to me. Hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so that YouTube can let you know every time I upload a video. Even though I upload a bunch of Spanish videos, so I'm gonna try to do this all Wednesdays. What day is today? I don't even know what day is today. I know nothing. Alright, I'll let you know further ahead when the English horror story videos is gonna be, because I don't even know who I am right now. It's almost midnight, so I think my brain is starting to go to sleep. So hope you like them, and see you next time. Bye. Of a squad car. worn work fruit.